Where do you go for what's going up, what's coming down? Who will win? Who will lose? Where do you go when you want to know what is happening today? Why did it start? How will it end? Where do you go? BCTV's News Hour, BC's finest hour. That's where you go.
Spectrum by Chevrolet. Spectrum, a General Motors import at Town Center's low, low introductory price. Spectrum, only $81.47. Spectrum. Spectrum at Town Center Chevrolet Oldsmobile. See us today. Town Center, just off the Portman Bridge in sunny Surrey.
Good morning. Native Indians in British Columbia are rightfully and properly jubilant this morning at what they can regard as a major victory in a step towards Aboriginal rights. At the same time, it can be said that the lumber and logging industry in British Columbia is, to say the least, slightly shaking in its boots, and that the government of British Columbia, which has carefully avoided any negotiations on Aboriginal rights, is nervous in the extreme. I only have one comment to make of my own this morning, and that is simply that even if the Aboriginal rights cover all of Vancouver Island and much of the forest land in the mainland, I stand by my decision, and your decision too, that they will not get Stanley Park back again. Now, before I turn to anything else, let me try and isolate for you the specific issue which we are facing now. And it would seem to be that the courts in British Columbia, by a 3-2 decision, considerable dissent on the court, have decided that there is a trial to be held, a case to be heard, on whether the Indians involved have the Aboriginal title to, and specifically, Meares Island. But let's look at Meares Island at the moment and listen for a moment to the worries of the Attorney General of the province of British Columbia, who is worried about the possibility of a favourable decision for the Indians. Here's Smith.
So, we'll be thoroughly prepared and well represented at that trial, and we'll be resisting the claim of Aboriginal title. Of course it worries us.
That trial will take place no later than November the 1st, 1985. And here are the reactions from two of the principal spokesmen for the native groups, George Watts and Edward John.
Because it just dealt with the injunction. We still have to go with our case. I think it seems to me that legal system are saying that they have to be a little more sensitive to what Indian people are saying.
We now have the BC Court of Appeal, in essence, rejecting the arguments put forth by the Attorney General that the issue of Aboriginal title has been extinguished in the province of British Columbia. And we feel that it is a very great victory for our people.
It might be many long years before the issue is finally decided by the Supreme Court of Canada, but for this morning, you're going to get three what I trust will be crisp views on the issue. And first, you're going to hear from Jack Woodward, who's a lawyer for the Clayoquot Band. And then from downtown, you're going to hear from Bob Findlay, Senior Vice President, MacMillan Bloedel. And, of course, no program about threats to logging or jobs in British Columbia would be complete without Jack Munro, Regional President of the I.W.A. Later in the program, we're going to go back to real hard times. The dramatic and seldom told story of how people suffered in British Columbia in the 30s, suffered beyond belief in situations that today's affluent society cannot conceivably imagine. The trek to Ottawa on the top of a CBR train in June 1935 started out as a cloud no bigger than a man's hand and developed into riots in Regina. And here to tell us about that are two men who were deeply involved, Robert Savage and Robert Jackson. But first this morning, and I got to use the phrase, I can't tell people to circle the wagons. I'm not going to say it's this or that or the next thing, but first, the Battle of Meares Island after the break. The good news in the judgment of the five judges, 3 in favour, 2 against, is that the protesters were thrown out neck and crop. I'm going to put that straight to Jack Woodward, the lawyer for the Clayoquot Indian Band. Are you glad that the protesters have been summarily dismissed and told to mind their own business?
Oh, the protesters are the friends of the Indians in this case, and I think it's unfortunate that they have been come down so hard on, but they did a good job in bringing this to public attention. I'm not condoning the violence or any of that stuff, but they brought it to the public attention, and the Indians thanked them for that.
And your clients came very close to the edge in that the judgments make it quite clear that the law must be obeyed and that people who do not obey the law will not be heard by the courts.
That's right, and this decision commands everybody's respect. This is a tremendous decision from this court, one of the most important decisions in Canadian legal history.
No doubt about that.
And it will command people's respect, and they will obey the law because the courts have taken such a good look at this issue.
If the courts have gone the other way, who knows, but we won't speculate on that. Now, give me your interpretation of the specifics of this decision. What does it mean to your clients now, and what will happen hereafter in terms of the specific decision?
It means that Indian rights are like anybody else's property rights. It means that they can have their evidence preserved until they have a trial so that the trial will be a fair trial. It means that their property rights won't be treated as some kind of second-class rights, that they'll be heard in the courts, and they'll be heard carefully, and that they'll be given full effect of law just as if they were any other kind of English common law right.
Now, this specific judgment, however, does not deal with British Columbia and the whole question of Aboriginal rights, does it? Yes.
Well, it deals with Meares Island, a very small portion of British Columbia, and of course it would be different if the whole of British Columbia was on the block, or if any other part of British Columbia. Meares Island is very special, and that's why the court did what it did. There's lots of reasons for that.
Yeah, but I want to get specific. This does not extend to every piece of logging territory claimed by the Indians in British Columbia, does it?
Well, if they had the kind of strong case that there is on Meares Island, it would extend to them. But there's few places that are as dramatic as Meares Island, where the trees are that old, where you can demonstrate the constant native use for hundreds of years, the way you can on Meares Island.
The point I'm making is, as you know, the other side put up a case saying that this could affect $1 billion worth of plant investment and 28,000 jobs. Was that a false premise?
Yes, it was, and the courts have observed that there's not one job would be lost as a result of this decision. Not $1 in profits would be lost as a result of this decision. You know, MacMillan Bloedel has been undercutting by more than 10% each of the last 4 years in that tree farm license. They don't need the trees. They certainly don't need the trees on Meares Island.
Is there any threat to other jobs in British Columbia? Should people be nervous now about investing in British Columbia in the lumber industry because of this decision, which certainly opens the door for the recovery, which will say, of land all over Vancouver Island and the mainland on the coast?
Well, in this decision, the court makes it perfectly clear that this is not going to stop logging wholesale on the coast. And no, people shouldn't be nervous about investing in British Columbia. There's just going to have to be some consideration taken of the native interest in the lands, that's all.
How many years before somebody can log Meares if they want to, or log trees on these disputed lands? How many years before this is through the process?
Well, possibly they will never be able to log Meares Island because of the fact that the Indian interest extends to the trees themselves on Meares Island.
A different question. How many years before the title is cleared up legally so somebody can do something with it, be it Indians or MacMillan Bloedel?
The Indians have been waiting 200 years, and we're ready to go to the table this afternoon if Brian Smith would talk to us. We're waiting to talk. We want to talk. The federal government says they'll talk. The industries are starting to talk. It's the province of British Columbia that's refusing to talk. We're ready anytime.
This now goes to a trial judge in British Columbia, correct?
That's right.
In November.
That's right.
And from that it goes to a court of appeal almost certainly in British Columbia in November, after that.
That's a good chance, yes.
And after that it'll go to the Supreme Court of Canada.
Very likely, yes.
How many years will that take?
Oh, that's several years.
Several years. So it'll be the land that's safe for your clients at least till the end of all the legal processes, 3, 4, or 5 years down the road.
That's certainly true, I think, yes.
Okay, it's a magnificent victory, a magnificent step forward, which you did not expect, I might suggest.
Well, the law's always said that. It's just that it's been hard to get a court to come out and enforce the law in that respect. And I think that the Court of Appeal shows tremendous courage in coming out and saying what the law really is.
And Stanley Park isn't threatened, reassure me.
Well, Stanley Park's already been logged.
My thanks to Jack Woodward. Next, we're going to talk to Mr. Findlay, Vice President, Senior Vice President of MacMillan Bloedel, after the break. And good morning to Bob Findlay, Senior Vice President of MacMillan Bloedel, who's in the downtown Robertson Media Centre. Mr. Findlay, what are you allowed to do now under the terms of yesterday's decision?
Well, we aren't allowed to do very much. We're allowed to go back on the island and gather up any of our tools and equipment, of which we don't have very much. Generally see that the island is left in the form that it was when both parties went ashore, and then sit tight until November.
In other words, you're allowed to send crews in to remove spikes which some of these protesters may have stabbed into the trees.
Yes, that's right, Jack.
How do you look at the overall decision now? Do you find this a great discouragement, and is it a threat to logging in British Columbia by big companies such as yourself, or is it only a restriction on MacMillan Bloedel and Meares Island?
Well, a number of questions there, Jack. Sure, we're a little disappointed in the ruling by the Court of Appeal, but to some degree there's some relief as well, because it's clearly identified that the problem is between the Native Indians and their Aboriginal rights, their claim to land, and with the landlord, which is the provincial government. And that the problem is no longer with the environmental protesters, which has been the majority of the problem so far. We really haven't had a problem with the Native Indians. Sure, we're concerned about the long-term effects of this. In effect, the Native Indians could make claim to any number of locations on Vancouver Island or in any other areas of the province between now and when they go to trial on Meares, or when they go to trial on any number of those.
Do you therefore feel that a company such as your own MacMillan Bloedel is in the position of being a kind of people who had thought they had title and ownership and logging rights to land, now are suddenly, you're the kind of squeezed between the provincial government and the Indian Aboriginal rights claim?
That's right, Jack. And of course that's a little bit shaking for shareholders and investors in British Columbia to think that our land base on which we base our major capital and our employment is not secure.
It's not liable to inspire confidence in investors in MacMillan Bloedel when here is part of their logging rights being challenged and will undoubtedly go to the Supreme Court of Canada 3, 4, or 5 years down the road.
No, that's quite true.
But I believe that your proposition to the courts that this would perhaps cause unemployment and a bit of economic chaos in the forest industry were rejected by the majority of the judges, were they not?
Oh, no. We didn't make that point, though, Jack, in the short term. We made that point in the long term, and the judges were talking short term. That's why they've said that there is no economic hardship, assuming the Native Indians get to court within a year, and of course it probably will take a year or so beyond that. And we have stated very clearly in both courts that there is no economic hardship until such time as we have the Meares Island removed from our tree farm license. And then in effect we can log, we have to log less than we're now logging, and that will create a loss of jobs and a loss of income to the company.
A very basic question I should have asked earlier. This only actually affects the Meares Island portion of your tree farm license in that part of the industry?
Yes, at the moment, but of course...
And that's only a minor percentage of it.
Yes.
If you lost this decision, would that mean you would lose, said he to be extravagant, your tree farm license in toto?
No, but of course, other areas of the tree farm license, like islands like Flores, could easily be up for grabs in terms of Native Indian claims.
Would you suggest that now is the time for the provincial government, which has carefully avoided it, to begin negotiations with the Indian Band so that you can carry on with your jobs and employment for British Columbians?
Well, I don't necessarily think that they should start negotiating. This has been suggested to go to court, and I think that that's what should take place. If we have to negotiate every particular tract of land that the Native Indians lay claim to, we've really got a problem. I think that it should go to court, as the consensus of the judges said, and then everybody will understand what is Aboriginal land rights and what is not.
Have you any idea what total, how much of MacMillan Bloedel's logging areas are actually threatened by potential Indian claims?
Well, I can tell you that almost all of our tree farm license 44 is included in what the Nuu themselves want on Vancouver Island.
And that would seriously affect your company, the industry, and the union?
Oh, no question about it.
So now what do you do now? Do you just now prepare for the trial on the 1st of November, at which you'll be represented along, I presume, with the provincial government?
Well, I'm not sure that we will be represented. I think that the Native Indians are going to be laying claim to the provincial government. We have the option of appealing the case, and we're thinking about that. We may not appeal it on the basis that it's going to, the whole situation is going to court within a year or so anyway.
But you could appeal this now to the Supreme Court of Canada.
Yes, we could. That's right, and which would, you know, I think that was the only thing that disappointed us in the decision, and that is that we were not allowed to proceed to log 1% while this is passing through the courts. And of course, we have already stated that should the land be declared the property of the Indians, that we would redress them.
And leaving aside that area which the Indians specifically say should not be logged at all, is that correct?
Well, that's right. That land is all preserved anyway in the very complete cutting program that was defined with the Minister of Forests.
Just to sum up, it's basically a battle now, you feel, if you decide not to appeal it to the Supreme Court of Canada, between the provincial government, perhaps even the federal government, and the Indian bands involved.
That's right, Jack.
And if a decision is given, you won't have to put out money, it'll be the people who'll have to put out money.
That's right. Yeah, we've put out enough as it is.
Off you go now to the annual general meeting, at which I'm sure this question will be raised in spades.
No question, yeah.
My thanks to Mr. Findlay, Senior Vice President of MacMillan Bloedel. Next, Jack Munro, Regional President of the I.W.A. Mr. Munro, just tell me what you think of the decision by the Court of Appeal yesterday and the prospects that the Aboriginal rights to a lot of the big companies' logging lands can go back to the Indians.
Jack, I think it's a bloody disaster.
That much?
That much.
Where do we go from there, though? Do you really think that there was no color of right and that the Indians should not have been given any delays to attempt to establish what they say is their Aboriginal title?
Well, Jack, I don't want to get into a particular scrap with the Indians. They are entitled...
Because you've got a lot of Indian members.
I have a lot of Indian members, and I know George very well. We've had our discussions before. The provincial government should sit down and negotiate settlements with the native people of this province so that our industry and our members feel that there is some security in working in this industry. There is in excess of 70% of the land being logged or harvested in this area that, that are on unsettled native land claims. Now, if this decision, and they say it isn't going to be, is expanded, it's a disaster. It basically shuts down British Columbia. And it was the high focus, all the media attention was about a bunch of kooky environmentalists over there who the court's arguments were not accepted by the courts. We're not going to lose any jobs, as Bob Findlay said today or tomorrow, but in the long scheme of things, we could lose. It's taking away part of the land, the forest base. It is going to end up shutting down manufacturing plants. If this decision is expanded, Jack, I'm not over imagining anything. It is in excess of 70% of the land in British Columbia, over 40%, closer to 60% on Vancouver Island alone. There are some things about this thing that people shouldn't forget. When the natives first got involved in this group, community group, they wanted jobs, they wanted their graveyards protected, they wanted some other things on the island protected, the water, I think, supply for the town of Tofino. all of those things in proposal number 2, option number 2, are protected, and without all of this high perf by these environmental kooks, wherever the hell they came from, the problem was resolved. Meares Island has been logged. It was logged 10 or 12 years ago in spots. The native reserved part of Meares Island has been logged. The logging that would take place in the plan that is approved by the community groups, by the Native Indians, by the Brotherhood, by the government, by the I.W.A. would not distract from the aesthetic view of Meares Island, except in 2 or 3 years from the very highest point in Tofino, you would be able to see a narrow strip of some logging on Meares Island.
What you're saying, just let me sum that up, is due to the media hype and the hysterical protesters who come from, as you say, God knows where. This was blown out of what a reasonable settlement and agreement that had already been made with the Indians, and we're now suffering from that hysteria and you would say hypocrisy by the environmental groups.
Right. Blown out of all proportions, Jack. And I can understand this lawyer character who they don't seem to have a hard time getting at the trough. No wonder he's ecstatic. He's just got a meal ticket for another 5 or 6 years. I don't blame him for being happy.
No, but now we're faced with the fact. You heard MacMillan Bloedel say, and they obviously agree with you, they may or may not be involved in appeals or trials. They want to get Smith to get off his back.
Well, the problem,
and
Jack,
negotiate.
The problem is this insensitive bunch of mandarins that we got in Victoria who don't give a damn about anything except their own particular interests. Well, Brian Smith can't be wrong all of the time. This time, he should get to the bargaining table and bargain with the Native Indians.
But the provincial
the problem.
The provincial government has never bargained with the Native Indians.
I know they haven't.
And on the basis that they will not talk, as I recall the old days, I think it was from Gardam or somebody else, until the federal government guarantees the cash money to them for any deal they make with the Native Indians.
Yeah, I know. Jack, you and I both know, you aren't in a position to say it as often as I am, the people in Victoria are a bloody disaster. Yesterday, on top of this thing yesterday, the Labor Relations Board hasn't got the political courage to rule in our favor, so they say the bank is not responsible for Lamford Cedar.
Lamford Cedar, you're talking about the...
Souk.
Souk, where you were hoping to get some
Labor Relations Board,
of
gutless.
$4 million from the Labor Relations Board.
Pawns. Yes.
Say that again, gutless?
Political pawns.
Political pawns. Well, you're in a good mood this morning, but now you're faced... Well, I don't blame you for being in a man mood. What do you think the reaction of the man in the street will be to this? What will he think about it?
Well, Jack, with all of the hype, I think that's the problem that a lot of people won't understand. There is a lot of emotion that feels, which I agree with, that the Native Indians haven't got a fair break from a hell of a lot of things in Canada. We treat them very badly. We don't do some of the things that we should do. Like we should encourage them to reforest their reserves and all this sort of stuff. Help them, train them. There are all kinds of things we should do for Native people. So there is that feeling mixed up with all of this hype from these environmentalist kooks that are still at large. And so I think the average person is torn. What's right and what's wrong? We know what's right is the provincial government should deal fairly with the Native Indians. Our industry, our members have to feel secure that working in this industry, their jobs aren't going to be taken away from them by some decision in the court tomorrow morning.
Is it not as dangerous that the Aboriginal rights go even on Meares Island to a specific Indian group, that the big high-tech companies like MacMillan Bloedel will walk away from it altogether and say, you want the land, you're going to log it yourself?
Well, I don't know about that. MacMillan Bloedel does some pretty strange things, but I don't think they would do that.
All right. In summary, therefore, do you tell me that the future economic health of the lumber and logging industry in British Columbia, how badly it is affected by this decision of the Court of Appeal?
Well, Jack, I think if some of the hype isn't taken out of it, it is very badly disturbed by this decision. If this sets a precedent and court decisions, especially appeal court decisions, stand until something changes them. Now, if this catches on, as I say, well in excess of 70% of the land in British Columbia that we're logging is on unsettled native land claims. If the courts were to apply that decision, holus bolus to this province, basically this industry would stop.
And we lose all what jobs you presently have.
Everything. There isn't one person in British Columbia that doesn't benefit somehow or another from the forest.
Yeah, and do you think it's right that the Indians should even have a claim at all for it?
Well, it should have been settled, Jack. But as I say, the native Indians, I don't blame them, but I think they got pushed into this high-profile thing, and the issue that is now around had absolutely nothing to do with what their concerns were when we first started talking about logging Meares Island.
Well, not a very cheery interview, Jack. My thanks to Jack Munro, Regional President of the I.W.A.
Before you go, Jack,
yeah?
I should tell your audience that your studio downtown is a bloody disaster. The tiles are out of the roof, the ceiling leaks, there's junk piled all over, except where the camera can see.
She talking about Robson Square Media
Yes.
Centre. That's your beloved government put in that media centre.
Well, it's a junk room.
Well, thank you very much. And so farewell, we say, to Jack Munro in the junk room in the Robson Media Centre. Junk befits junk. Thanks, Jack.
All right.
Next, get your composure, Webster, and come back with a solid, sober story about the real depression, which, if Munro's right, might still face us yet, after the break. Many years ago, I interviewed a man called Robert Liversedge, who lived in Vancouver Island, who'd written a book on the trek to Ottawa in 1935. And at that time, I met Mrs. Shields, who was the daughter of Slim Evans, who was the leader of this incredible trek to Ottawa, which came as a kind of mushrooming of the discontent of ordinary people in Vancouver and British Columbia in the 1930s, when there was a depression the likes of which people today cannot even visualize. With me in the studio this morning are two survivors of the trek to Ottawa. I have here Mr. Robert Jackson. Where do you live now, Bob?
Powell River.
And I have here Mr. Robert Savage. Where do you live now?
Cornell.
Let's go back to that summer of 1935, and you two tell me what you were doing in that summer before the trek to Ottawa started. What conditions were like here? Mr. Savage.
Well, it was quite a busy time in Vancouver. The police van and the ambulances were about the busiest vehicles in town. There was snake parades and taking over buildings to demand that the end to the relief camps, and this was the there had been lots of strikes before this, but in 1935, when we emptied the relief camps in BC, we had snake parades and taken over Woodward stores, the museum, and places of that description.
Georgia Hotel?
Georgia Hotel, all these places.
The post office?
Yeah. No, that was later.
That was later.
That was later. But I must say there was no damage done or anything like that. It was just a protest, a march in and march out again and things of this nature.
What was the proportion of unemployed in these days, Bob?
Well, it was pretty high, but I would like to make one commentary first, if I may.
Please.
I think that it is a terrible thing upon society that 50 years ago we struggled and we fought and we wondered, trying to fight for relief for single unemployed, and 50 years later we're in exactly the same thing, and the main demand is the same: work with wages. Our sons are now facing that sort of thing, and there is absolutely nothing involved as far as grandchildren are concerned, which I think you're well aware of. At that moment, the biggest things that were happening was people were wanting work with wages. Plus, there was a war on the horizon. And my father said to me one time many years ago that the capitalist system really wants to do one of two things: either starve you to death or take you off to war and kill you so as they could feed the remainder. That was his bit of philosophy. Boom or bust.
What were you doing in the 30s?
In the 30s, I went to my first relief camp in 1932, where there was no 20 cents a day. We were taken to a place called Mount Ole, which is about...
Outside Kamloops?
Yeah, north of Kamloops, about 80 miles.
And how old were you then? I want to get this in detail.
I would be 17 then.
You were taken to a place called Mount Ole.
Mount Ole.
What was at Mount Ole? People don't know this.
Mount Ole was just a place where they took people, single unemployed, and put them in there and fed them 3 meals a day, and the meals were terrible. I think they fed us on roughly 6 cents per day per person. So you
Did you ask to go, or did they sweep you off the street?
No, they didn't sweep us off the street. We asked to go. There was, you know, we had to go we had to go up and register and go there.
And did you do any work in these relief?
Not in those places. Not at that first year. We did nothing. But the following year, I think, or a year and a half later, they started to pay the people that looked after the cookhouses $7.50 a month.
$7.50
a month. And we were still not getting anything as people there.
And many of you would be in Mount Ole.
I would say roughly close to 100, 150 as I remember.
All young, single guys.
Mostly all young, with nowhere to go, nothing to do.
No unemployment insurance.
No unemployment.
No welfare money.
No welfare.
How had you been living up till then?
My father and mother were on relief. And I can't remember correctly, but I would suggest that there was somewhere around $15 a month they got, and I think either $2 or $3 per month extra for each child. And that's really the basic reason why I left home. There wasn't enough to feed us all.
Now, tell me your story in the 30s. As I say, today's generation have no idea how tough it was.
Well, as far as the relief camp goes, we went into the relief camp in Harrison Mills was the first one. There's 3 or 4 camps spread out there a few miles here and a few miles apart. And it was just the ordinary relief camp, and the lights were out. You could see through all the cracks. It was just tar paper and built with green lumber. Naturally, when it dried, you could see cracks all over. And the food was atrocious. As a matter of fact, I think they got the cooks down at the Salvation Army somewhere. And the clothes was surplus from First World War. The boots, they had great, well, I liked them, but a lot of people didn't, because they like, but the boots were from the type from the First World War, no instep in them, just a straight, big, thick sole.
What did you get paid in that camp at Harrison?
20 cents a day, and we were building highways.
You mean building government highways?
Yes, we were building government highways. They'd give us a wheelbarrow and give us shovels and rakes, and we'd all go out in a gang.
How many in the camp?
About 150, 130, it varied up and down. See, it was taken over at this time by the Department of National Defense, who tried to bring a form of discipline in there, which didn't work out too well because we organized against it. And we got so fed up with the camps, we marched out of the camps in 1934. All the camps there, we had 2,000 or 3,000 came into Vancouver, all over town here, organizing and picketing and what have you. But it wasn't a success, so we went back to the camps.
You retreated to the camps to get your 3 meals a day?
Up to about the size of it, and then we came out in 1935, everybody. We emptied the camps in 35.
Well, this was the organization of the Relief Camp Workers Union?
Yes, right.
How many camps would there be in British? I mean, people, just realize, kids, if you're watching this morning, what was happening. Everybody, many unemployed were there. It was a small province, but many unemployed.
Oh, I can't figures, but it was an atrocious amount. I don't know.
An atrocious percentage.
Yeah.
And these were all single unemployed, many men who'd come to this country, come here because the climate was better.
Right. I would suggest, I think something's got to be said, because on that highway that goes from Revelstoke to Golden, it's called the Big Bend Highway, it's now underwater. I think you did a show on putting it underwater.
Right.
The thing is there that in those camps, men went in there in the middle of the winter, and the snow was 20 and 30 feet deep. And we have seen foremen of those camps dump gasoline into the Columbia River in order to make out they were doing something when they were really doing nothing. But they had to show something that something was running. And there was no way, even there was no road, the trucks couldn't run. Consequently, the gas was poured right into the Columbian River. We have seen that. And these sort of conditions, people doesn't seem to understand that I think it's got to be a comparison. The kids of today have a similar problem, because the pressures in some ways are similar. They're not stuck out in the middle of the camps. They're a little more sophisticated now. They leave us here, but they're thinking about it. The thing that the kids have got to understand and things that's got to happen, they're in exactly the same thing. They're getting bored in a similar fashion. The government does not apply in anything for kids to do. There is absolutely no gymnasiums around the country. There's no place where kids can go. The government could hire a few sports directors or try and bring them together and do something to help take off the...
Fair enough, but let me get back to what happened in 35, because there was considerable organization of the unemployed, was there not?
Well, yes, even the married people were organized in those days in what was known as the block and councils.
Where were your father and mother living?
My father and mother?
Yeah.
Well, I came out here as an orphan.
You came out as one of Bernardo's orphans?
No, no.
Just as an orphan?
A religious.
As a young guy?
Yeah.
You were born here, were you?
Yeah, I'm born in Vancouver.
63 years ago, Jack.
All right, next I want to talk about McGeer reading the Riot Act, the occupation of these places downtown, and what led to the trek on Ottawa in 1935, after the break. Maybe I'm not giving you the picture. Picture Vancouver in the 30s. It was a small town, and there were tens of thousands of unemployed who, on the organization of the Relief Camp Workers Union, moved into Vancouver on these snake parades, as you call them. And at that time, you were a division captain in the Relief Camp Workers Union. And you, how many men would be under your command?
350.
Split into platoons?
Correct.
And were they disciplined?
Oh, yes. Self-discipline.
Self-discipline. You never had any problem, except with the police.
With the police.
Well, even if we had a problem with the odd person, there was the odd person, we would sort of take care of that ourselves. The division would take them up before the group.
When was it McGeer read the Riot Act?
April 23rd, 1935.
Were you there?
Yes. We were at the cenotaph. We'd been parading, and of course we marched along and demanding work and wages, and we want relief right there and then. We hadn't eaten for 4 or 5 days, so everybody is marching up and down and saying we want relief. And of course we didn't get any, and then the police attacked the parade, scowling on his horses, and foot police, and so on and so on. And finally Mayor McGeer, who they called Jeremiah Jesus McGeer, marched out with his paper and read the Riot Act, which meant that everybody would get off the street so that you know the circumstances. So we right away formed ourselves into peaceful groups and marched back to where we belong. Our division belonged in the Ukrainian Club. And we marched there. They had given us their hall. And this is...
that was Jeremiah Jesus McGeer.
That's correct.
Was there much violence with the police that day?
Yes, there was a lot of violence with the
You
police.
named a famous or infamous policeman.
Yes, Scanlon.
Scanlon.
Yes.
He was
And
the man
Barker. And Barker, it was his mate.
And he was the man with the horses.
You're at the horses, yes.
Good horseman.
Now,
A former black and tan.
Oh. Were the people of Vancouver kind?
Yes. In just this same year, we had a parade in Vancouver, and the press estimated there were between 35 and 50,000 people, reaching from the Holden Building to the Lumberman's Arch in
Stanley Park.
In Stanley Park. All right. Then this was made up of mothers who were feeding the strikers, and it was made up of unions and some of the teachers who led the whole classes off into the parade. And anyway, they got
How
out
the
there.
devil did you feed, though, when you were not in the camps?
Well, you did a lot of banging on back doors.
Well, we had an organization which consisted of bumming sheets or soliciting sheets, and we used to go out to door, and we would solicit funds or food, and we used to take it back. And every day during that period when we were getting the money, we got 60 cents a day. And with that 60 cents in those days, Jack, we could eat 3 meals and get a bed for $1.05 a week.
Who gave you the 60 cents?
The organization.
They collected money.
We
and put
collected
that.
it.
They seldom had it to give, though.
But
For $1.05, you could get what?
we got a room for a week in the old Central or the Empress Rooms or any of those places around Main and Hastings.
And there wasn't much in the way of crime around, there was there?
No, not much.
No, but I think that's got to be given credit to the unemployed.
Yeah.
They had one way to go. They could either get organized and fight for something, some relief of some type, or go to jail.
Who were the principal leaders? Was it the party? Was the Communist Party? And I'm not saying this in
Workers'
any of my
Unity
old
League.
red-baiting business.
Workers' Unity League.
Yeah.
You see, the Workers' Unity League is very similar as you got Solidarity today. It involved the Camp Workers Union and 2 or 3 and numerous other organizations.
Mind you, while you were on the streets and starving, even the householders weren't doing that well, were they? Didn't they used to go up to the city hall for a bag of groceries
That's
or
right.
something?
My father used to walk from 27th and Knight Road to, there used to be a relief place at the corner of Canby and Pender. And Ireland, I think, was the name of the relief commissioner, who was later I think, put in jail for a couple of years for something. I'm not sure
I've read
myself.
about it. I've read about
But
it.
anyway, he was a real old. But then they used to. The big items were macaroni, prunes, rice, and that sort of thing. And my dad used to walk back with it. That was his first relief in those days. And it was degrading, no clothing or nothing. Even a single unemployed that had. If you were lucky enough to have a girlfriend and fall in love, you could go on relief if she was pregnant. Otherwise, you couldn't.
So if she got pregnant, you'd go on relief.
That's right.
How much was relief then?
It wasn't very much. I can't remember, Jack, frankly.
Well, if you, like, you know Hamilton Hall is?
Yes, yes.
Well, that would hold 300 or 400, but they used to only let 2 in at a time, and it would be raining, and I don't know why I ever lined up there, because I never got a meal ticket there yet. And there'd be 600 or 800 of us all lined single file, so sometimes we'd say, well, let's get in out of the rain, and that would end, you know, we knew we weren't going to get anyway, so we...
All right, now
I got it. $3 a week, I think we got for a single man.
All right, now we get to the occupations. You occupied a number of places in protest, did no damage.
Woodward stores. We
snake paraded them.
Snake paraded around the stores, and then also the museum, as it is. It's not the museum anymore.
Vancouver Art Gallery.
Yes, we went to the went in the art gallery and asked the people to leave peacefully, and we were just taking over the, you know, demanding relief and so on.
Just to jump a little bit, when was the Battle of the Post Office? That was the next.
Well, that was later. That was later.
That was Winch and my friend of Victoria, the old guy. What was the name of that guy from Victoria?
You're thinking of Uphill?
No, Brody.
Brody.
Oh, yeah,
Brody.
Steve.
He might phone this morning, Steve.
Isn't that nice?
He's still around.
We're looking for him.
You're looking for Steve Brody. Give us a call, will you, Steve? Now, I'm going to take a break and I'm going to get down to the case of the trek to Ottawa, which is an even more dramatic and much more tragic story in many ways of how the relief people, the unemployed were treated by the Prime Minister of Canada, a fellow by the name of R.B. Bennett.
Iron Heel.
Iron Heel Bennett. After the break. The Canadian Pacific Railroad supplied, I think quite willingly, the transportation for the trek in Ottawa. They didn't object. Tell me when it left and how that started.
Well, we left, we went down where we usually used to catch the 1010. We're going anywhere else down here. Every night there was people riding.
Photogore Avenue.
There's people catching the train every night, and we used to have a chap, a minister, used to see off there, Holy Willie. And of course, he used to say, goodbye, my sons, and this and that and the other, and a lot of the boys, you know what they said. But anyway, this night, this day we went, there was quite a few thousand of us, and we were organized, and took so many boxcars each, and the police didn't interfere or anything of that nature. And we started off just like that.
No, but you got to tell me who Slim Evans was, and he led the trek in Ottawa.
Well, Slim Evans was a very wonderful, warm labor leader in the early years, 20s, 30s, and 40s. He was a likable person. He was a communist. He never denied that. But he had a way about him for people to come around him, and he gave of himself. He really gave. He was a leader that you don't find today in too many trade union in the trade union movement today.
And he was the head of the organization.
He was the head, yeah.
Yes. How many of you started out on the CPR boxcars on the roof and riding the rods for Ottawa?
About, well, right from here, like from locally right here, about 1,500 or close between that, and picking up between the and Golden made up about 2,000.
And the people on the track along the way were helpful?
Oh, yeah, out cheering. Cheering is on. That's about all they could do. A place like Golden, though, there was I think it was a big Finnish settlement there. They came out with great big reduction pots and cooked for us, stuff like that.
Farmer donated a cow.
Yeah.
Farmer did it?
Oh, yeah, butchered and pigs and stuff like that.
The weather was good?
Weather was excellent.
Next stop after you left British Columbia?
Well, Golden, and then further along was Calgary was the first main stop.
What had you grown to by that time, in terms of numbers?
Well, we'd added about 500 or 600 more, and there was a group coming from Edmonton that never really reached us. Had they of it, would have been. But I think
that was 400.
400. Yeah. Then you got to Calgary. There was some minor trouble with the police in Calgary, as I recall from Liversedge's book.
Yeah. Well, the only thing was, as far as they weren't going to give us any relief, and I think there was some school teachers or somebody there who said, surround the building till they give, you know, so we just surrounded the building till we got relief there. They used to give you, well, we had 2 meals or something like that, and we had to eat in groups.
How many days did it get you to reach what turned out to be the end of, because the object of the exercise were Evans and his committee were going to see Bennett.
Bennett, yes.
Didn't have any appointments for him, but you were going to see him, right?
Oh, we had an appointment, all right.
You had, eh?
Oh, yes, there was, they sent, from Ottawa, they sent Mannion and Weir, 2 members of
That
Parliament.
was when we were in Regina, though.
Yeah, well, that's...
All right, we got to Regina. How many were now in the Trek, had arrived by train and other means in Regina?
About over 2,000.
About 2,500, 20. Yeah.
You were in Regina?
Yes.
You were in Regina.
Yes.
You tell me what happened when you got into Regina and held your parade in the center of Regina.
We were able to get relief from the city of Regina and also through the provincial government. We got 3 meal tickets a day to eat in the restaurants. They were very good meals. The public was very acceptable. There was never any ruckus in that regard. And everything seemed to go quite well until we got information that the police had lined up on the outskirts of Regina, hundreds of them, and were not going to let us go any further. And that's when it came about that Doc is talking about with the Weir and Mannion sending in this invitation for a delegation to go to see RB
So they
Band.
sent an invitation in for your delegation to go on by themselves to Bennett, but the government had made the decision that the protesters would be stopped at Regina.
And we attempted to go out of Regina by road with Reverend East and a number of other leading people in the city of Regina, a lot of CCF people, and we attempted to go out by the road, but we were turned back on the road.
By the police?
By the police.
Then what happened?
Well, the delegation, the eight of us that went to see Bennett, how this thing started. 8 of us went to see Bennett. As I say, they agreed to 8 of a delegation. And while we were away, there was to be no interference with the trekkers. But on the way to Ottawa, as we passed a trainload of Mounties coming from the east. So we knew there was things weren't all well in Regina. And then naturally we got down to see Bennett, which
Wait for Bennett for a minute. The trainload of Mounties, the Regina City Police, the other RCMP,
Yeah.
what happened in Regina?
That was after. That was July the 1st, in famous July the 1st in 1935. We were on what was known as the Market Square, and on one corner was the fire hall, one corner was the city police station, and on the other end, but the rest was all open streets on the side of the square. The rest had buildings, and that square was surrounded by cars, which we know now were plainclothes-mounted policemen. And on that side of the square, and on that side of the square, and the other end of the square was great big moving vans that were just parked there. And there was a whistle. I was distributing the strike bulletin at the time it happened, and a guy by the name of Jerry Winters happened to be speaking, and they were reporting the strike to the public in general. There wasn't too many trekkers there. We heard a whistle, and out of that police station on that far corner came about 8 abreast, policemen as big as I've ever seen in my life with big billies, and I swear to Christ they were drunk, most of them. And they just waded in. And at the same time, without anybody's knowledge, these vans opened out, and out of them came all these mounted policemen and all of the plainclothesmen. And it was in this melee that this detective got killed. And Arthur Evans made a statement later. Put some of those police that were in that area where that man got killed on the lineup, and I'll pick out the man that killed him. They never did that. That man could have been killed by anyone. But we believe he was killed by one of his own because they didn't know anybody, and some of them were drunk. And believe it or not, the brutality of the police was outrageous. And I say this now without fear of contradiction. It could happen again if the worker decides he wants to try and get a better lot. That's got to...
Now, not all the trekkers were in the square when the riot started.
No, about 300.
They gave them free tickets to a ball game. Yes. And half of them were in the ballpark because free tickets were given out. This was to divert some attention away from.
And then they moved in and beat the hell out of the trekkers and the supporters.
Anybody.
Of the square.
Yes. There was a lady I run into.
It was not the brightest moment in the history of democracy in Canada or the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, was it?
Well, they said there was no guns used. But as I was saying, this Goldtooth Patterson was shot in the leg, and there's a chap in Regina right now shot in both legs. We have a chap in town right here. We can give you his name right now and his phone number. He was shot in the back. And I went in the doctor's office to help take Sammy in there, and the floor is littered with about 20 people laying on the doctor's floor. The doctor wasn't sympathetic, of course.
On July the 1st.
Yes.
I think we
and anyway, the point is, the authorities said they never used any guns. Well, if they didn't use any guns, how did people get shot?
I think we should make this point. They went around, the police, after that, later on in the evening, they went around and they shot straight down one of the main streets in Regina, and we were given a fine that looked like a trekker. He was put into one of these great big vans, and some of them were beaten mercifully, some of the guys.
Mercilessly. No, I can believe you on that. Now,
and there was
did they open a camp for those who were arrested?
No, they were threatening to open, I think it was Lunsden Camp or something, north of Regina.
They had a camp ready to put the protesters into, but they didn't. Now, well, you went and saw this dreadful character, R.B. Bennett, in Ottawa, didn't you? With Slim and the many other members.
8.
After the break. I get the picture. The police and the government had decided to stop the trekkers in Regina, and stop them they did. But they made a little bit of a carve-out. They'd said, you'll stop in Regina and we will bring your leaders to Ottawa where they will have an audience with R.B. Bennett. Am I correct?
Correct.
So you went on to Ottawa. First class in the train, I believe.
That's correct, yes. A first-class hotel, everything, yes.
And what happened when you got into, what were your demands and how did R.B. Bennett, the Prime Minister of Canada, treat you people?
Well, we didn't get a chance to put our demands forward because Bennett said the places you are living are as good as the average Canadian home, the clothes you're wearing as good as the average Canadian, the food you're eating is better than the most average Canadian home. And inferred that we should be happy with it. We didn't get a word in edgeways. I got 2 words in. I think Arthur Evans got a few words in, and he said as far as Evans was concerned, he stole union funds or something of this nature. And Evans called him a liar, and the thing kind of broke up after that. There was just Bennett there and Sir George Purley. They had a couple of chaps help Sir George sit down because he couldn't make it on his own. But that was about the only audience we had, and you could see big feet in behind the curtain, RCMP guards behind him. So it must have been us. They were big feet anyway. So.
You mean to say he was sitting there by himself, kind of with Sir George Purley, who was doddering?
Yeah, that's right.
And apparently no security, except that you could see big boots.
Yeah, and behind the drapes in behind, just like behind you. That.
Isn't that stupid?
Yeah.
Wasn't that stupid?
Yeah.
Was he rude to Evans and you and the rest of you?
Yes, he was very rude, yes. I mean, he'd no reason to be. We weren't rude.
What were your demands to him?
Well, it was get rid of the relief camps and work and wages, naturally, and the right to vote. We were disenfranchised.
How were you disenfranchised?
Well, because you were considered in the 30s, if you were in a camp or on one of these things, you're considered a pauper or how do you
a transient.
A transient.
You had to live in the city 6 months in order to vote. You did that in Calgary. You had to live there.
No, you
for
couldn't
6 months.
vote. You couldn't vote if you were on welfare and your vote was you were disenfranchised. If you're in a relief camp, you were disenfranchised. You had no vote, and this was all part of the demand.
So Bennett kind of peremptorily listened to you, told you were well off, and did he throw you out or what?
Well, no, not really, but it came to an end, and we just left and started back. But if all the people that came out to cheer us going had joined the trek, we'd have had a million people in Ottawa. Every town and city we stopped in, the people came out, churches, everything came out to cheer us on.
This is through Ontario?
Oh, yeah, Ontario and Manitoba, everywhere we went.
But you wouldn't get much support in Ottawa?
Yeah. Yes, the people in all the civic workers had a big, large meeting for us and reception. Yes, thousands came out.
Do you think do you think Bennett realized at all the plight of the unemployed in those days?
Well, I think we did some good. Today we've got old age pensions, we've got unemployment insurance, we've got medical, a lot of politicians will tell you they got this by voting. It was from the Trek all these things were derived. There's no other way, and that's only the way going to get it today.
It gave the establishment a bit of a fright because they thought the Red Revolution was here, did they not?
I think so.
I think the Liberals learned a lot at that period. I think Canada should be very pleased of the activity that happened in that year because R.B. Bennett that November was defeated. And I think the Liberals learned a little bit in that period, and they did abolish the relief camps and paid us 40 cents an hour while we worked. But the rotten thing that they did do was if I went to work for 8 weeks, for an example, I earned $320, we'll say at $32 at $4 a week. I was given $4 when I left the camp in a scrip, which is cashed at the post office like a money order, and every other $4 that I had earned through that period was dated. And every week I was able to cash one of these scrips for $4, which I had earned. That's the way they paid us when they paid us the $40.
You couldn't spend the $32?
No, we could not spend the $32. In other words, we were working for our relief.
Perhaps, fortunately, Hitler came along and solved the problem.
For some. And a lot of our guys became heroes.
Well, that's why I say, Jack, when you stop to think of it, right present day they say the same. Where's the money coming from? Do you realize when the war came that Canada had the world's third merchant marine? They were able to do that. So why in an emergency like this, with all these young people getting food parcels and this sort of thing, why can't we set up an emergency today and help them out?
There's always money for wars, but not always money for people or jobs.
Well,
that's the system.
I think the system has got to change. Let's face it. I think I heard you make some remark about being a survivor.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is this, that these debts, these billions of dollars that were supposed to be both in America and Canada and around the Western world, are never going to be paid. Never in God's world will they be paid.
Now,
and we have got to recognize that.
What? Now, I want you to tell me now what you're planning to commemorate the famous trek to Ottawa. What are you planning? Who's going to tell me about what you're going to do?
Well, I have it right in front of him, if you'll allow me to read it.
You've got your glasses on.
Yeah, but I need another pair. I'm an older person.
How old are you?
71.
How old are you?
73.
73. What did you do the rest of your life after the trek?
I worked in the lumber industry, and I was a towboat man.
What did you do?
I'm an engineer.
Engineer. Now, well, tell me.
April 23rd, we're going to try and mark the anniversary of Jerry McGear's reading of the Riot Act in Market Square. In Victory Square at Hastings and Cambie. We're going to try and figure out some sort of a celebration for the reading of it. We're going to try and include some people in the city.
What day is that?
That's April the 23rd.
Well, Harcourt will come. Do you want Harcourt?
If he'll come, we'd love him.
Harcourt had better come.
We're going to have a speaker on May Day, May the 1st. And we're going to have a symbolic occupation of the Carnegie Museum on May the 18th.
May the 18th. Why the Carnegie Museum? Was that one of the places you occupied?
That's where he occupied. And on June the 1st, we're going to have a banquet in honor of the trekkers at the Ukrainian Hall at 806 East Pender. And for information, phone 684-8653.
86. Just a minute. I'm reading a little thing here. It wasn't easy in the, which camp is that? Quirmish camp?
Squamish.
Squamish camp. Provincial police sailed in with a machine gun.
On the bow.
On the bow of a boat. Lots of beating and arrests. Machine gun.
Oh, yes.
Well, we should mention that behind the St. Mary's Hospital in the city of Regina, opposite the big door in the stadium where we stayed, the police set up machine guns so we couldn't get out.
This was Canada, 1935.
This was in Regina, 1935. And another funny thing that happened, you know the prairie rains?
Yeah.
How they can really come down. About 500 guys, about 9 o'clock at night, got up on the roof in one of those great big rainstorms with soap and actually got a bath out of it. Because there was no other facilities.
Well, you survived, didn't you?
We did.
You survived. A lot of the guys fought in the Mac Papineau Battalion in Spain.
That's right.
And then, of course, joined the army.
Yeah, 2 of the delegation to Ottawa were killed in Spain.
Okie dokie. Let's go to the phone. See how many other survivors we can find of the trek in Ottawa, 1935. And we're going to start by talking to, and we'll phone him now. Have you got, eh? After the break. No program about the 30s would be complete without a contribution from Steve Brodie, who led the forces who occupied the post office. What year was that, Steve?
1938.
That was as late as 1938. Just give me a brief snapshot of what happened in the post office in 38, because that's part of the whole Depression story.
Well, I think it's the most important fact to remember about the post office demonstration and the smash-up that ended it in June 1938 was that from day one, we insisted every time we were approached by the police that we were willing to take punishment for any offense that we had committed. And for 30 days, they avoided that. And right up until the last moment, we were denied the fundamental right to arrest and trial, which we insisted on. We sat quietly waiting for the attack, which it was designed to be, after every man had assured the officer in charge that we were willing to march quietly to wherever we could be held before our appearance before a judge. And we were refused absolutely any right to the protection of the Canadian Constitution, which says the police don't punish. That's the job for the magistrate. So we assured them of that time after time.
And so it was after 30 days. What was the name of the policeman that led the attack on the post office?
That was Colonel Hill of the RCMP. And his sergeant's name was Wilson.
How many people were actually thrown in the bucket after the riot, after the fight?
He was ever charged. I understand that they were writing out a commitment to send me to the penitentiary for 5 years. And you've got to remember, you know, that this wasn't unusual. Harry Mulland and Fred Grange, 2 years before that, were convicted of rioting. The total damage, including repairs, to one window was $7.50. Alec Manson gave them 2 years in the penitentiary.
The hanging judge.
And Fred Grange did every legal day in the hole and coughed up his lungs 6 months later after he got relieved and died. He was a severe asthmatic, so they were all set to arrest me and give me the same treatment in 1938. Then somebody mentioned that we better be careful here because those guys, we attacked them. They asked for the law to be carried out. So nobody was ever arrested. We occupied the post office and art gallery for 30 days and nights.
And the Georgia Hotel briefly.
Yeah, overnight. We dickered, we made a little dicker with them and got some... What? I can't hear you, Jack.
You made a little dicker and got some food. Steve, I felt I had to talk to you this morning, even though you went on the trek.
I was on the trek. I was on the Market Square. I was on the Market Square when the guns were firing.
Oh, forgive me, Steve. Anyway, thanks for your contribution.
Rounds of ammunition were fired that night, if anybody wants to count them.
How much was fired?
Eh?
How much was fired?
Over 1,000 rounds, by their own count.
Well, I've got the Regina paper.
Buried in burlap sacks that we never even got track of afterwards.
Yeah, the number of people...
There was only one policeman killed.
A number of people had bullet shots and gunshots in the head, legs, and body, and that was...
3 people on our side were sent to hospital with gunshot wounds, and they tell us that there was nobody got killed. I know there was burlap sacks buried in the corner of some graveyard. Don't ever worry about that.
Steve, are you coming over for the celebrations?
Oh yeah, I can still walk my first 4 miles in a quarter of an hour.
Okay, I'll give the boys your phone number, and I've got to go, and thanks for your reminiscency.
Hey.
Much obliged, Steve. Go ahead, sir. Were you on the trek?
Yes. Good morning, Jack. And to my old-timers there, it seemed to me I remember their faces as soon as they come on your program. I went through the 1935. I didn't get in on the trek to Ottawa, but I supported it. I made a few dollars, and I got a job. I was one of the lucky ones, and I went north. However, I would like to ask the old buddies there a question. Where the heck was that soup kitchen we used to go? I was just a kid, too, and I can't remember that soup kitchen we used to... Was it on Pender? Can they tell me?
I never went to one.
But I never went to one.
Oh, they had the soup kitchen there. What was the name of the place?
Oh, the Mission Soup Kitchen.
I came here in 1930. I went over to Pender Harbor. I was in Cheamview, Agassiz, all them relief camps. And my 2 younger brothers still, and I was only 17 myself.
And they were younger than you?
Yeah, Gordon and Stan, and there's us 3. We beat our way from Golden up here.
How many bleeding relief camps were there?
Oh, good Lord, I remember I was in Agassiz, Cheamview, and the first one I went by the old Princess Pat Princess Patricia boat over to Half Moon Bay or Penda Harbor.
Good stuff. Well, try and get to the... When's the big bash? Come on, give me the date.
Oh, June the 1st is the banquet. But I want to add, Brother Jack, that June the 10th, we're going to send a delegation of a representative of the trekkers, plus some of the unemployed youth here, and make the delegation up and interview Mulroney, who is also a conservative government.
I'll be there. I've got nothing better to do.
Okay, I'm much obliged. I gotta go. Here's another old-timer who was on the trek, a friend of mine. Go ahead, Jack.
Okay, Jack. A word to Doc. Savage.
Yeah?
You remember going down to Salmo, you and I, to pick up the camp and take it up and rejoin the trek? And when we went to the camp, we had to spend the night in with some friendly Doukhobors to avoid the provincials.
You don't remember that, Doc, do you?
And then we wound up in Regina. You went down on the delegation.
Yeah. Well,
Miller.
you've done well on and off since then, Jack, haven't you?
I can't complain, Jack. I'm another survivor.
Good. Thanks, Jack, for calling. Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yep.
Oh, I wanted just to mention this is more or less trivia, but I lived in Ogden near the CPR shops during that era, and a family of 8. And we watched the train go by. It went right behind where we lived when we seen all those young men and whatever on the top of those boxcars. My dad worked for the CPR at that time, and my oldest brother. My mother took in 2 other young guys that had no jobs, no money, no food, no nothing. And at lunchtime every day of the week, there'd be some fella that my brother would bring home for something to eat.
These were tough days. Where was Ogden?
It's about 5 miles east of Calgary, downtown Calgary. That's many years ago.
Thanks, ma'am. Go ahead, please.
Is that for me?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, I'm a senior, and I remember this episode distinctly in Winnipeg, Manitoba. The crowds of people, they'd call them communists, and they turned the hoses on them. At one time, it was suggested that they would cut hair. It was very hot at this time. They would cut hair and spray it in the wind and then put the hose on to disperse the crowd. Now, my brother-in-law was with the RCMP, and I know I was an outsider looking over it. At that time, people that were working were taking cuts in pay to keep their jobs. And that's what the politicians should do, and that's what the civic employees should do, and all, to make more money.
She's nice.
Thanks, ma'am. How tough were things in Winnipeg in those days?
Very tough.
Very tough indeed, particularly because of the climate in the wintertime.
They had a big soup kitchen.
Go ahead from Nanaimo.
Good morning, Jack.
Morning.
Going back to the relief camps, the timekeepers had to weigh the food out before even the cooks could start. And in those camps, when they got the tools, the only people that made any money was the manufacturer's tools, because there was 1 axe, 1 pick, 1 rake, 1 wheelbarrow, the whole thing. For each individual man was there. I know my husband was one of the timekeepers.
That was the only equipment you had.
Ollie Bruin, who was, I think, a member of the Liberals or Conservatives in British Columbia, who comes from Bill Bennett country, was the Minister of Labor, I think, at that time. And there was a lot of scandal around about taking machines into places in bogs and lost and never used.
Hiding them in the bogs.
Hiding them in the bogs.
Forgetting about them. Go ahead, please.
Yes.
Carry on.
Jack, I'd like to set a couple of things straight. I was in Regina that night, and my remarks are directed chiefly to the gentleman, the lily white one in the checkered jacket.
That's you. Were you in the Mounties?
No, I was not. I was a citizen of Regina.
Carry on.
First of all, there were no drunken Regina policemen on the night of July 1st, 1935, and if anybody says so, he's a liar. Secondly, Charlie Miller was not killed by a policeman. If you want to get shake your head. If you want to get a Regina Leader paper of July the 2nd, 1935, you will see Charlie Miller being beaten to death by one of the On-to-Ottawa strikers with a large chunk of wood which closely resembles a 2x4.
Just a minute, did you ever see that picture?
I happen to have a picture of that taken out of the paper, and I can't say it right at this moment, but I think the man is incorrect when he talks about those policemen not being drinking. Absolutely. I disagree with him completely.
I can tell you this much, that Martin Bruton was chief of police in Regina in those days, and if he ever caught one of his constables or officers drinking, they'd be off the force so fast it would make their heads swim. There's just one other point I'd like to raise, and that is there is no St. Mary's Hospital in Regina.
Well, whatever the name of it was right. It's a Catholic hospital right across from the main door.
There were an awful lot of policemen there that night, and they weren't all Regina police, and I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if on an occasion like that the police hadn't been primed with some booze, to be quite honest.
I would.
Having been around a little bit myself.
I would, and I'd like to make another remark, too, while I'm at it. From Cornwall Street to Broad Street, on 11th Avenue, there wasn't one pane of plate glass remaining on either side of the street.
I believe that's
I agree,
correct.
Dan. That's
Everybody
correct.
agrees on that. Thank you, sir. Do you not think that these men were entitled to go on a protest to Ottawa after the dreadful conditions of the 30s?
Indeed, I am, and I had every sympathy with them until they rioted and killed one of our policemen.
We did not start the riot.
They didn't start the riot.
We never started. We had no clubs. The police had them.
The police started the riot. I've interviewed enough of the old-timers in the old days for the CBC to be quite confident in that myself. The conduct of the government and the various governments in the main was abominable. Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yes. That's you.
Okay.
Can't hear you.
Yes. Well, I'd just like to say that the police had a very nasty job to do. Please sympathize with, I would, you don't know, but I would suggest that the police sympathize with the men, the unemployed men. But, you have to use a little bit of common sense.
Oh, I agree. There's faults on both sides. But what we're talking about are the economic conditions that led to the necessity for the trek in Ottawa and the lack of worker wages for Canadians in the 30s.
And it still exists today.
Go ahead, please.
Hello, Jack. You're
Yes.
a hard man to get a hold of.
Here I am.
I've been trying for a long time. I'm one of the old-timers. I didn't get on the trek because it didn't get to me.
Just a minute, hold on. Are we down to 30 seconds? The big bash is June the 1st, the banquet. Put up the telephone number again. And June the 10th, Ottawa. And what else, quickly? The occupation of Carnegie Hall when?
In May the 8th.
May
the 18th.
We're back after the break. Sure enjoyed the old timers from the trek, I'll tell you. Jean Chrétien. Oh, Jean Chrétien's here tomorrow morning. The Liberal Party, the guy who lost out to John Tunnov's leadership. He's bright, provocative, and witty. Webster and Chrétien tomorrow, 9 a.m. precisely.